Many animals, like the punk turtle or the vaquita, are on the brink of extinction because of human actions and will soon vanish. However, not everything is bleak and discouraging. Humans have also played a role in bringing many animals back from the brink of extinction. From the giant panda to the black-footed ferret and others like the blue iguana, the Pemba flying fox, and many more. Here are 15 animals saved from extinction by humans. But before we get started, subscribe now before I become famous. Number 15. Giant panda. With their adorable round faces and playful antics, giant pandas have captured hearts worldwide. Yet these charismatic bears have long teetered on the brink of extinction. At one time, tens of thousands of pandas roamed the bamboo forests of southwestern China, but by the 1980s, habitat loss and poaching had reduced their numbers to just over 1,000 in the wild. The giant panda seemed destined for oblivion. Fortunately, intensive conservation efforts pulled pandas back from the precipice. The Chinese government established dozens of forest reserves to protect panda habitat. Scientists perfected captive breeding techniques to bolster wild populations, and strict poaching penalties helped curb illegal killings. Thanks to these interventions, giant pandas are making a slow but steady comeback. Today, around 1,800 pandas survive in the wild, a remarkable turnaround from just 800 in the late 1970s. While still classified as vulnerable, pandas are no longer endangered. This recovery is encouraging, but pandas aren't out of the woods yet. Development and climate change continue to threaten their forest habitat. Small, isolated panda populations also struggle to breed. Going forward, even stronger protection measures are needed to ensure pandas remain an integral part of China's natural heritage. The tale of the panda reveals that, with enough determination, even the most endangered species can be pulled back from the abyss. But it also shows that conservation is an ongoing battle. Number 14. Sea otters. The sea otter is an endearing marine mammal because of its cute appearance and playful demeanor. However, these whiskered creatures were once hunted to the brink of extinction for their dense, soft fur. By the early 1900s, sea otters were virtually wiped out, with only about 1,000 southern sea otters remaining along the California coast. Humans directly contributed to the sea otter's dramatic population decline through overhunting. Luckily for sea otters, conservation efforts allowed the species to bounce back. The International Fur Seal Treaty of 1911 banned large-scale hunting and protected sea otter populations so they could recover. Additional protection came from the Marine Mammal Protection Act and Endangered Species Act in the 1970s. Thanks to these laws, sea otter numbers have rebounded significantly. Today, there are estimated to be around 3,000 southern sea otters in California and over 100,000 sea otters total along North America's western coast. While legal protections pulled sea otters back from the edge, they still face ongoing threats. Oil spills, pollution, and entanglement in fishing nets take a toll. And the return of their historical predator, killer whales, presents new danger. With apex predators like great white sharks and whales depleted by human activities, killer whales have expanded their diet to dine on sea otters. While conservation laws enacted last century arrested the sea otter's slide towards extinction, modern-day hazards continue to impact populations. Number 13. American bison. The thunderous hooves of tens of millions of bison once shook the Great Plains of North America. But by the late 1800s, overhunting had decimated the iconic herds and brought the species to the brink of extinction, with perhaps only 1,000 animals remaining. The outlook for the American bison was bleak. A few far-sighted individuals, however, stepped in to save the majestic beasts. Starting small private herds and lobbying for government protection, early conservationists like William Hornaday and Theodore Roosevelt led the charge. Hornaday was stunned in 1886 to find hardly any bison left on the plains. His impassioned campaigning led to the creation of preserves like the National Bison Range in Montana. Meanwhile, a handful of ranchers in the West realized the potential value of bison and started protecting small groups on their own lands. This allowed bison numbers to gradually recover, though they remained relatively low at around 12,000 animals in the early 1900s. It was commercial breeding that truly revitalized bison populations. Ranchers discovered bison to be hardy, low-maintenance livestock whose tasty meat contained little fat. As the bison meat market grew slowly from the 1970s onward, so did America's bison herds. Today, roughly 400,000 bison live on commercial ranches, while an additional 100,000 are in public parks and preserves. The total North American population sits around 500,000, a remarkable conservation success story. Though still less than 1% of their pre-colonial numbers, the resilience of the American bison is a testament to the power of early conservation efforts. Number 12. Aleutian Canada goose. The magnificent Aleutian Canada goose, with its distinctive white neck ring, almost vanished forever. These geese once numbered in the tens or hundreds of thousands across Alaska's Aleutian Islands, but introduced Arctic foxes, eager for an easy meal, decimated the geese. By 1962, only a tiny remnant of between 200 and 300 geese clung to survival on remote Bull Deer Island. Conservationists leapt into action. The few remaining geese were declared an endangered species in 1967. Hunting bans gave the beleaguered birds a respite. Teams laboriously trapped foxes on nesting islands, restoring safe havens for the geese. Between 1974 and 1995, some 1,700 geese were translocated from Bull Deer to newly fox-free islands. Captive breeding and releases bolstered wild populations. Wintering habitat was secured. Gradually, the geese crept back from the brink. The goose's recovery is a conservation success story. Populations rebounded from around 300 in the 1960s to over 37,000 by 2001. That year, with the geese no longer endangered, they were rightfully removed from the protected species list. Today, Aleutian Canada geese once again nest on their island homes and migrate south to winter. These survivors bear witness that even species on the knife edge of extinction can flourish again when humans act decisively. Number 11. Pemba flying fox. The Pemba flying fox, a giant fruit bat found only on Pemba Island off the coast of Tanzania, has made an astonishing recovery from near extinction thanks to dedicated conservation efforts. Just 30 years ago, this impressive bat with a wingspan over 5 feet wide was barely clinging to existence. In the late 1980s, Pemba flying fox numbers had dwindled to only a few hundred individuals due to extensive deforestation of their habitat and overhunting. By the mid-1990s, the population was estimated to be between 4,600 and 5,500 bats. The bats were considered a delicacy by locals and were heavily hunted, bringing them dangerously close to extinction. Dedicated reforestation projects and community education programs were initiated in the 1990s to protect the species. Hunting bans and new wildlife reserves also helped the population start to recover. By 2008, the Pemba flying fox population had soared to an estimated 22,000 to 35,600 individuals. From just a few bats in 1989 to over 20,000 today, this massive comeback from the brink of extinction is an inspiring conservation success story. The Pemba flying fox still faces threats from habitat loss and human disturbance, but armed with greater public appreciation for these giant bats, ongoing conservation initiatives aim to ensure their continued survival. Number 10. Golden lion tamarin. In the early 1970s, there were shockingly only about 200 of these strikingly beautiful monkeys left in the wild. With their magnificent reddish-gold coats and long, lion-like manes framing almost bare black faces, they were teetering dangerously close to being lost forever. Intensive and innovative conservation efforts have helped bring them back from the edge, with the wild population now bouncing back to around 4,800. It's hard to believe that just 50 years ago, these charismatic monkeys were critically endangered and on the precipice of vanishing completely. Rampant habitat loss and fragmentation as their home in Brazil's Atlantic forest was destroyed had left the species clinging to survival. Collection for the illegal pet trade had also robbed the forest of these golden primates. In an inspiring act of human conservation, scientists and institutions like the Smithsonian's National Zoo banded together to save the golden lion tamarin. A coordinated captive breeding and release program was launched, vaccinating hundreds of wild tamarins against yellow fever, and ongoing reforestation efforts have also been key to ensuring this monkey's future. While they're still endangered with fragmented habitat, their prospects today are infinitely brighter thanks to human commitment. From only 200 left 50 years ago, around 4,800 golden lion tamarins now swing magnificently through the forest they call home, a testament to species conservation at its finest. Number 9. Louisiana black bear. The Louisiana black bear, once numbering over 80,000 strong, roamed expansively over 24 million acres of land in Louisiana and neighboring states. But by the 1950s, habitat loss and overhunting had decimated the species to an estimated 150 bears confined to small pockets of Louisiana forests. Teetering dangerously close to extinction, the Louisiana black bear was listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act in 1992. This provided much-needed protection for the remaining bears and catalyzed efforts to restore their dwindling habitat. At their most critical point, only about 150 Louisiana black bears were estimated to remain in the wild, More than 485,000 acres of vital bottomland forest habitat was voluntarily restored, reconnecting fragmented subpopulations. The establishment of new national wildlife refuges further expanded protected lands for the bears. Ongoing monitoring of the bears themselves, including tracking movements and analyzing genetic diversity, guided strategic management decisions. Thanks to these collaborative recovery efforts, Louisiana black bear numbers have rebounded significantly. By 2016, when the subspecies was delisted from the Endangered Species Act, the total population stood around between 500 and 750 bears. Today, the Louisiana black bear population likely exceeds 1,000 individuals across 4 main subpopulations, though still occupying just a fraction of their historic range. The future looks brighter for these iconic bears that inspired the creation of the beloved teddy bear over a century ago. Number 8. Iberian lynx. The Iberian lynx, a spotted wildcat found only on the Iberian Peninsula, has made an incredible comeback from the brink of extinction thanks to dedicated conservation efforts. At one point in the early 2000s, there were fewer than 100 Iberian lynxes left in the wild. This shy, bushy, bearded feline was struggling to survive as its habitat was lost and its main prey, the European rabbit, was decimated by disease. With so few breeding adults, extinction seemed imminent. Fortunately, an ambitious captive breeding and release program helped pull the Iberian lynx back from the edge. Conservationists carefully bred lynx in special centers, maximizing genetic diversity. Over the years, nearly 500 kittens were born and raised. As the captive population grew, lynx was released into new areas to re-establish wild populations. From just 2 isolated pockets in Spain in the 2000s, there are now thriving populations spread across both Spain and Portugal. In tandem with the breeding program, conservationists work to protect and restore the scrubland habitat the lynx relies on. They also aided rabbit populations, the lynx's main food source, to rebound after disease epidemics. The payoff of all these efforts has been remarkable. From fewer than 100 at its lowest, the Iberian lynx population has climbed to around 700 today. While ongoing work is still needed, especially to reduce road fatalities, the Iberian lynx is no longer at immediate risk of extinction. This iconic wildcat has gone from verge of extinction to a growing population and become a symbol of what can be achieved when humans take action to reverse damage and protect wildlife. Number 7. Scimitar horned oryx. With its long, curved horns resembling scimitar swords, the scimitar horned oryx is one of the most elegant antelopes in Africa. But by the 1980s, this desert-adapted species had become extinct in the wild due to overhunting and habitat loss. At its lowest point, only a few dozen individuals remained in captivity. Thanks to an ambitious captive breeding program, the scimitar horned oryx has made a remarkable recovery. In the 1960s, about 40 oryx were captured in Chad and transported to zoos and private ranches around the world. This small herd became the founder population for captive breeding efforts over the next few decades. Ranchers in Texas played a pivotal role as the hot, arid climate provided ideal conditions for the oryx to thrive. Driven by the opportunity to charge hunters top dollar to hunt the exotic antelope, ranchers built up herds numbering in the thousands. While controversial, this hunt-based model motivated ranchers to invest heavily in conserving the species. Today, Texas alone harbors an estimated 6,000 to 10,000 scimitar horned oryx, compared to just a few dozen at the species' low point. These substantial captive populations laid the foundation for ambitious reintroduction programs aimed at restoring the oryx in the wild. Beginning in 2016, over 100 captive-bred oryx have been flown from the UAE to Chad and released within a protected reserve was once their stronghold. Fitted with tracking collars, the oryx have adapted extremely well, with females already giving birth to the first calves born in the wild in decades. If this success continues, conservationists are hopeful that scimitar horned oryx numbers will reach 500 within a few years. While still a long road ahead, the scimitar horned oryx represents an inspiring conservation success story. Number 6. Siberian tiger. With fewer than 40 individuals left in the wild in the 1940s, the Siberian tiger was on the brink of extinction. But through dedicated conservation efforts, this magnificent big cat has made a remarkable comeback. Of all the tiger subspecies, the Siberian tiger faces one of the harshest climates. Its thick, shaggy coat helps it survive the bitter winters of Russia's Far East. This is also why it was so coveted by hunters and poachers. Intensive hunting and habitat loss had decimated populations by the early 20th century. By the 1940s, the few remaining Siberian tigers clung to survival in the birch forests of the Russian Far East. The subspecies found its last stronghold, and it was here that concerted preservation efforts began. In 1947, the Siberian Tiger Project was launched, dedicating itself to intensive research and monitoring of the few tigers that persisted. Anti-poaching patrols were stepped up and logging was better controlled. The tigers were granted full legal protection. Gradually, the population began to recover. From just 40 individuals, the wild Siberian tiger population rose to around 500 by the 1990s. Habitats were expanded and connected to allow the tigers to roam. Numbers have largely stabilized since then, but around 600 Siberian tigers now prowl the forests of Russia, China, and North Korea. It's a conservation success story proving that dedicated action can pull back a species from the abyss. But Siberia's great cats aren't out of the woods yet. Poaching, habitat loss, and climate change all continue to pose threats. Number 5. Vancouver Island Marmot. The Vancouver Island marmot, with its chocolate brown fur and white nose patches, is one of the cutest creatures in all of Canada. But this unique and highly social mammal found only on Vancouver Island was once on the brink of extinction. In 2003, there were fewer than 30 individuals left in the wild. This critically low number made them one of the rarest mammals on Earth. Thankfully, an intensive breeding and recovery program prevented their extinction. The drastic decline was caused by habitat loss from logging, which enabled predators like wolves and cougars to easily access the marmot colonies. Climate change also reduced their food supply. To save the beloved marmot, an emergency breeding program began in 1997. Over 500 captive-born marmots have now been released back into restored habitats across 20 Vancouver Island mountains. An innovative stepping stone approach was used, with marmots first released at safer sites like ski hills to learn survival skills from wild marmots before going to more remote locations. Supplemental feeding and monitoring have also boosted their survival. Remarkably, the wild population now sits at around 200, no longer on the knife's edge of extinction. But recovery teams continue working hard as the marmot remains critically endangered and depends on human assistance. Number 4. California Condor. With a wingspan reaching over 9 feet, the California condor is North America's largest flying bird. Sadly, this majestic creature was nearly wiped out completely in the 1980s when its population dropped to a critical low of just 27 birds left in the wild. Poaching, lead poisoning, habitat destruction, and pesticides had decimated the species over the last few centuries, leaving it on the brink of extinction. In a last-ditch effort to save the condor, conservationists made the bold move in 1987 to capture all remaining wild condors and begin a captive breeding program. Removing the condors from the wild was highly controversial, but ultimately necessary to save the species. The 27 condors were split between the San Diego Zoo and Los Angeles Zoo, where captive breeding began in earnest. The condor program was expensive, costing over $35 million, but the early results were promising. The first captive-bred condor chick hatched in 1988, followed by over 100 eggs laid by 1994. With the success of captive breeding, conservationists then started reintroducing condors back into the wild in California and Arizona in the early 1990s. The condor population slowly but steadily grew thanks to these efforts. By 2010, there were over 100 condors flying free, a huge increase from just 27 birds in 1987. Today, the total population numbers over 400, with more condors now living in the wild than in captivity. While still critically endangered, the outlook's more positive. The California condor has been pulled back from the brink after coming dangerously close to being lost forever. Number 3. Blue iguana. The blue iguana is a formidable creature with its armor of spikes and its blazing red eyes. Yet this behemoth, weighing up to 25 pounds, was nearly wiped off its native Grand Cayman Island. From thousands across the terrain, habitat destruction and predators reduced its population to between 10 and 25 by 2002. Teetering on the brink of extinction, the blue iguana might have vanished if not for a dedicated recovery program. Initiated in the early 2000s, the Blue Iguana Recovery Program brought together an array of partners. Through captive breeding and releases into protective wilderness reserves, they sought to rebuild the wild population. Raising hatchlings until they were big enough to survive, the program has so far released over 500 blue iguanas, an amazing success. Their numbers have increased at least 15-fold from the critical low in 2002. This act has been recognized by conservation authorities. Earlier endangered, the blue iguana was downlisted to threatened status in 2012. The recovery program aims to have 1,000 roaming protected habitats soon. Though they'll likely never reach their previous abundance, this marks a major win against extinction. A flagship animal of the Cayman Islands, the blue iguana is the largest native reptile. Exceeding 5 feet in length, this colorful lizard is a national symbol and source of pride. Number 2. Whooping crane. The whooping crane is a magnificent bird that once roamed the skies over North America. It's distinguished by its snowy white plumage and crimson cap. But by the 1940s, habitat loss and overhunting had decimated the population to just 21 birds, bringing this iconic species to the brink of extinction. At their lowest point, whooping cranes were more endangered than the giant panda or mountain gorilla. Fortunately, dedicated conservationists leapt into action. Teams donned crane costumes and used puppets to teach captive-bred chicks essential survival skills. This innovative technique allowed birds raised in captivity to successfully breed and migrate when released into the wild. Scientists also worked tirelessly to protect vital wetland habitats and crack down on illegal hunting. Thanks to these Herculean efforts, whooping cranes have slowly recovered. Today, about 800 cranes soar through the skies, a remarkable comeback considering the entire wild population once totaled just 21 individuals. While still endangered, the species finally seems to be flying away from the extinction vortex. Much work remains to ensure the whooping crane spreads its expansive wings far into the future. The whooping crane's inspiring recovery proves that hope still takes wing for species on the edge. Number 1. Black-footed ferret. With its distinctive black mask and legs, the charismatic black-footed ferret was once widespread across the Great Plains of North America, but this ferocious predator of prairie dogs faced extinction by the 1970s. At their lowest point, only 18 individuals remained in the wild. Today, thanks to a remarkably successful captive breeding and reintroduction program, over 300 black-footed ferrets are back roaming the prairies. The black-footed ferret's fate has long been tied to the prairie dog, its main food source. As prairie dog colonies were decimated by habitat loss, disease, and poisoning, ferret numbers plummeted in tandem. The final wild population clung to survival in Wyoming until disease outbreaks nearly wiped them out in 1985. With extinction looming, conservationists swooped in to capture the remaining 18 ferrets. This motley crew of 7 males and 11 females formed the captive breeding population. From that tiny gene pool, miracles followed. The first captive-born kits arrived in 1987. Over the next decade, zoos and breeding facilities churned out thousands of ferret kits. Careful reintroduction projects followed, starting in 1991 in Wyoming. There were triumphs and setbacks, including outbreaks of plague, but the ferret clung to survival. By 2015, there were over 200 mature individuals in the wild. Today, the outlook for the black-footed ferret remains fragile but hopeful. Captive breeding continues to supply new generations, with over 300 ferrets now surviving in the wild. Plague remains a threat, so vaccination and disease control are constant challenges. But if current success continues, full recovery is now imaginable for a species we once thought lost. By the way, did you know that pangolins are endangered? In fact, they're the most trafficked animal in the world. Plus, they're incredibly rare. If you're curious about pangolins or other rare animals like this one or that one, check out this video. 15 weirdest animals ever discovered.